everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and welcome to night 5 of the 2023 ChemKnits Chanukah special. Every night of Chanukah, I am dyeing a different colorway of yarn featuring multiple different techniques, and the whole thing is a lot of fun. Now, the theme for this year is roughly chasing joy, and so I pulled an extremely Rebecca color palette of bright pinks, purples, and some blues to play around with tonight. My plan is to paint some yarn using these dry dye powders, creating something that is non-repeating and a little bit randomly placed all around, letting these colors speak to me. I'm not going to list all of these color names right now. Instead, I'm going to tell you what colors I'm using as I go, because when I'm starting out, I hadn't decided how many of these colors I'm going to use. I'm gonna let what's happening on the yarn really speak to me. Since I'm gonna be dyeing with dry dye powders in an immersion steam pan, we're gonna need a lot of yarn mops today. A yarn mop is a skein of yarn that I use to wipe excess dye off onto it. Sometimes it's sucking dye out of a kettle, and other times it's taking some dye residue that is on my gloves and wiping that color on. And for today, I picked out a few different yarn bases to use, so let's go look at the Yarn Mop yarn bases. For our yarn mops today, I'm going to use the last two skeins I have of Dyer Suppliers 80/20, 80% superwash merino wool, 20% nylon sock yarn. I believe it has 3 plies. Yeah, it even says on there 400 yards-ish per 100 grams. And we're also going to use a skein of Knit Picks Bare Felici, which is 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon. Since this yarn is no longer available, I won't be linking to it down below, but Felici is still available, and I will have an affiliate link in the video description, along with some Amazon affiliate links to the catering steam pans and other tools and equipment I use. And affiliate links mean that I might earn a commission if you make purchases through those links. But anyway, I'm going to pre-soak all this in plain tap water. Our yarn mops have soaked for a while, and I'm just going to go ahead and add 4 tablespoons of white vinegar to this pre-soak, just so that way there's some acid in here so our dyes can start to strike. I have a feeling we might need to steam set our yarn multiple times for the mops, but I also am not entirely convinced what we'll be doing with them. So we have them ready to go, and I'll squeeze the water out when we need to. As for the yarn for our colorways, we're dyeing 10-gram mini skeins of Wool to Dye Force Platinum Sock and Platinum DK, 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon. I've got 300 grams of yarn in the pan, and I'm coming over to start with 8 cups of water and 3 tablespoons of white vinegar. Now, unlike the full skeins that I use, Wool to Dye Force mini skeins, and well, I guess these are technically micro skeins, are shorter. And so as I add the yarn in, there's less scrunch that needs to go into it, so there's a little bit less resist from that. And I think sometime, some other Chanukah, I should therefore try to add more scrunch, add more yarn in the pan, because that does add some interesting effects, especially if we're doing like a more random kind of colorway. But what I want you to see is that we've got the water, enough water so that way there's water at the surface, but we also have yarn at the surface still. And so if we had less water, the yarn would be a little bit more compressed on itself, and so it'd be harder for dye to go down some layers. But anyway, I'm going to turn on the heat. We're across 2 gas burners on my stove, so we start warming up. And I'm going to make another batch of 8 cups of water plus 3 tablespoons of white vinegar to have on hand in case I want to increase the water volume at all while we're dyeing this. And I'm going to go put on my deluxe rubber respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves for when we're hot, and we'll get started. We're going to start with 2 of my favorite colors, and I'm trying to be consistent with my desire for this technique to feel random. Whoop!
See, we had color splash, that's all good. And the reason why I need to just really like move things around, like ideally I will have some of every color on every skein, but I also don't want things to feel too overall repeating as we go in. And so I started with the electric violet. I then brought in some hyacinth, which you'll notice as it first goes in sort of disappears and then kind of comes back and develops. But those are very actually different purples. The electric violet has a lot more pink to it. Ooh, okay, let's go in with some purple pop. This is one of our fluorescents, and I don't know if we'll bring in other pinks as well, but you'll see that this definitely breaks because as I go about, it is a purple. In the center, it's a purple, but while I'm spreading it, that's giving us pink, and I think we'll make sure it's a color that will help make sure we have very little white left in this colorway. But so far, so good, but we need some more blue. Look what I just did to my glove. I was trying to adjust it, and it just came off. All right, I'm going to reduce the heat to low so we're a little bit less steamy. And I'm going to bring over some extreme blue. I don't know if I'm going to want to go over some Caribbean as we go through this or not. Because extreme blue isn't a primary. It is very pigmented, as you might gather from its name. Ooh, that is quite pretty. And so yeah, I'm debating because we might end up with getting a lot of coverage over that purple pop. I'm debating what I need and what I want here. Actually, these four colors could be good. I was like pausing to think for a moment because I couldn't really decide what I wanted to have where. So I was trying to think, and I don't want this to feel too similar to the, I want this to be able to feel a little different, but oh, when I layered that lightly, we got some speckles. That was nice. I'm planning on coming in and adding some speckles in here as well, but you'll note that for the time being, we do have some light patches in here. And when it comes to mini skeins, it sometimes can be really challenging as I come in and layer some color. With mini skeins, it can be hard to make something that is non-repeating, just because by the nature of a 10-gram mini, it's so thin that it's just harder to get that feel than it is to get it on a full skein. And I think that just like we've done a lot of times throughout Chanukah so far this year, I think that we might dye some full skeins in this colorway as well. Okay, and I want a little bit more purple pop, even though I'm a little bit afraid of it, because I'm hoping that as we do all this that we're not going to lose the bright, because we might lose some of the bright, but it also might help us and spread a lot for us. Okay, and see, it's okay if I wait a little bit before coming in to work colors through. And the nice thing is that we are getting some speckles from using that purple pop, but then we're also still getting spread, and so that is really good. I do like what we have here so far. Okay, and now I want to try something. I'm here with some Pink Orchid, and I'm speckling just in some of the areas that have a little bit more white right now with a bright pink. And this is actually surprising me a little bit because I thought that I would be going in and speckling with black. But Pink Orchid is a color that I know strikes pretty quickly. And I do want some like speckled, whoop, that was a little heavy, speckled feel. But my fear, when I was thinking about this, is my fear was to deepen things too much. Because I love deep colors, but I'm afraid of losing some of the deepness that we have here. And so it's funny is that this almost looks red, even though it's definitely not. And yeah, I was just afraid that if I brought in the midnight blue or the black, that might change the way that some of these colors are feeling. Because I'm hoping, even though if it ends up sort of like a dark and more saturated, I'm hoping we still have some brightness to it. But overall, this is one of my favorite kinds of techniques. But it's amazing. Let me zoom in. It's amazing how red these speckles here feel to me compared to the vibrancy of the other pink. Because on its own, I would be like, oh, Pink Orchid is a bright pink. But it's just so much different from the pink that is slightly bluer in the purple pop. But anyway, I feel like I like where this is going. I don't know if I want to add, I think I'm not going to add some darker speckles. What I might do as we flip is speckle a little more, add it a little bit softer, the purple pop. So then we get those dark speckles. Here's another area, but with the pink spread around it. And I think that's the direction that I want. Now, we don't need to wait forever before we flip. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, I mean, we may not need to wait long at all. Besides the pink, a lot of the colors really have struck. I will go ahead and wait 5 minutes, I think, just to give things a little bit of time. But this is going great.
Let's flip the yarn over and we'll see what kind of coverage we have. So you do see that we have some colors that came through, and mostly it's the pink that went through more layers because that neon pink does spread. The other colors we do have good coverage and spread, but it means that I don't think I need to worry about putting purple on top of purple and things as much. I might do that some, but the pink, since that one spread the most, it means we're less likely to have it completely take over colors in other sections. But you can also see as I flip with this one in particular, yeah, there's some stuff on the top and bottom. I think some of those minis may have been twisted. But anyway, I'm gonna go put on my respirator mask again and we'll start dyeing this side. With full skeins or with mini skeins, when you flip the yarn, you wanna make sure that you are exposing areas that didn't get dye from the first pass. But with mini skeins, it's possible for one to get completely trapped under the rest because they move relative to one another. And so one mini could end up trapped under one of the other bundles each time. And so it's just important to pay attention to that as you flip and move the colors. I am really happy with the coverage that we're getting, even though I am still planning to do a couple of flips just so that way we know we're getting color coverage. And it's okay, again, if some white is left behind. That isn't something that's gonna really bother me, but I just want to layer all these colors. And I know that the two main purples I'm using, the hyacinth and electric violet, are very similar, even though the tones are different. But I think having them both in here, along with the blue and the pink, is just giving us a little bit more dimension to our final product. But anyway, I waited about 5 minutes in between each of the subsequent flips. And then once I was satisfied with the color coverage, I maybe added a little bit more of that water I had off to the side as necessary, but I let everything heat for 30 minutes from the last time I added dye.
While working on the main colorway, here is our yarn mop. I may choose to add more color to this because I haven't even finished one batch, but I am going to steam set it while I'm waiting the 5 minutes for the yarn beneath to finish, and probably start on a different skein as a yarn mop and switch back and forth as needed, just because those pinks spread.
I'm anticipating we might have a little bit of pink left in here. I'm a little nervous that we could have some bleeding, but ultimately it wasn't that much purple pop and the other colors are really good. I think that this batch is a little bit pinker than what I had envisioned, but I have a feeling that that's going to shift from mini to mini. Or by mini to mini, I also mean batch to batch to batch. But I do really like this colorway. It's just, you know, when you're painting like this and you're applying the dry dye powder, there's a randomness to it when you're deciding what goes where and like how you want the contrasts to be. But I think that it worked out really well in terms of not a lot of color left in the pan, so that's great. And it's okay if there's some pastel sections left here as well. But anyway, I'm gonna let this cool completely, then we can wash it. As we go to wash the yarn, I'm expecting to see some pink in the water. But there's a semi-practical reason for that. We did have, I just added some dish soap, we did have some pink left in the dye bath, which technically I've got the third round in the same pan and there's a little more residual pink. Although, I have to say, I mean, I haven't squeezed the water out yet. Okay, yeah, there we go. But like, that's barely anything. Okay, that's not bad. I was like, okay, gonna hold my breath. But this is fun. It's funny, because I think things feel a little bit more pink than purple. And the speckles are super subtle. But I hope that this fits in with the rest of the yarn really well. Even though I know Hanukkah isn't about creating a fade set, I do like to try to order things into some kind of colorway, color progression that makes some sense. And I mean, I guess I shouldn't talk too much more because I don't know the order of things, so I don't want to give a spoiler for another video. But this is fun. If I remember, we'll bring out the black light. I don't think I brought out the black light for another situation, but that's okay. Oh, because I didn't actually use a fluorescent. I mean, it's probably fluorescent. I am digressing a lot. But anyway, I'm not seeing any more color. So I'm gonna go put this in the spin dryer and then hang it up to dry. Woohoo, woohoo. Using the same dye bath as before, I prepared to dye more yarn. In this batch that I'm showing right now, I'm actually dyeing 2 full skeins of Stroll next to one of our platinum collections of micro skeins. And I'm doing this because, well, I guess this is something I've been doing multiple times in this series because it's sort of interesting to think about the full skeins versus mini skeins and the way that that affects the random patches of color. Because I think in my head, when it's full skeins, it's a lot easier for me to go full on random and not worry about coverage. But with the micro skeins, I want some of each color on each of those micro skeins. And so that works in my head a little bit more. I did put the full skeins on either side of this pan with the minis in the middle and really just continued layering these same 4 colors on and then bringing in some Pink Orchid speckles as well. And again, I waited about 5 minutes between each flip. I also made sure to move where the zip tie was so I could get coverage in there. And then once everything was done, I let everything heat for 30 minutes before proceeding to dye more mini skeins, which at this point, I don't know if I'm gonna do, I'll probably do all that off camera, but I don't know, some of it might be on camera. I don't know yet. Here is our yarn. When you look at this yarn, would you call this purple or pink? I think in my head originally, I was planning to have a lot less of the fluorescent pink in here. However, getting both a spread of color and speckles from one color because of the way Purple Pop breaks is a huge plus. Like in here, you can see those more purple speckles, and bringing that in meant that I didn't need to come and introduce another color because also these speckles weren't going to dim the fluorescent pink that we have here because of just the way that that color works. If I had come with Midnight or something and speckled on top, that color also might have spread and made this pink a little bit less bright. And then in some areas like here, you can see both some of those more blue speckles from the Purple Pop, but then also the more red speckles from the Pink Orchid. And it really tickles me how the Pink Orchid still feels very red to me, even though, oh my gosh, I know it's such a bright pink, but it's just a different tone from fluorescent fuchsia. Or even Purple Pop, but the fluorescent fuchsia, which has a hair less blue in it than what Purple Pop does, but that bright pink is the same, like the fluorescent fuchsia is the primary. Now, I have not done this with every colorway that has fluorescence in it, and I'm not plugged in. Oh dear. I don't always bring out the black light when it's not just like a full-on neon colorway, but eek, it is so fun to watch the pinks light up. Let me zoom in on an area. This area right here is particularly bright, but oh my, you can just watch the whole thing light up and you can see like the flash of everything else behind. But you will notice that as we go to the edges where this fluorescent pink starts to overlap with some of the blues or the purples, that maybe you see a hint of some fluorescence, but it's much dimmer. Both primarily probably because of the concentration of the dye, but I don't know, this is just something that really entertains me. My goal with this colorway overall was to create something variegated and speckled. So I will be curious as I start twisting the minis to see if I see speckles all over. And I did notice when I had all of the minis laid out, there were definitely some batches where I went a little bit heavier with the Purple Pop and some where I was a little bit more restrained. I wonder if that difference came from when I would sort of move the Purple Pop through first right away versus when I started speckling with it a little more, waiting before moving it through. I did dye some full skeins in this colorway. The colors on our full skeins, at least right now, feel a lot more, I guess, blended. It feels a lot more overall purple blended. And it feels like the color patches are a little bit more regular in repeating. Even though I can show you that like this blue doesn't go all the way through this section, this is still a non-repeating colorway. But when it comes to minis, as you go and wash them and move them, each mini can move relative to one another. So this patch of blue, which maybe was all in one section, as we pick it up, it moves more relative to each other. So the colors already feel not blended in the same way, but more sort of mixed up and less like the chunks and patches. It does feel like the full skeins, even though it is the same color palette, were dyed in one of the less bright pink patches, but also don't forget that the full skeins had to be scrunched more in the pan. So as I was applying a similar amount of dye to the full skeins as the minis, even though each bundle had 100 grams there was more yarn stuck underneath and beneath itself with the full skeins. And so maybe that gave us a little bit more blending, or I don't know. Overall, I would say they're very similar, but they might swatch a little differently. The speckles are still present on the full skeins, but I think it's also easier for me to find areas where I don't see the speckles. Again, because of the way that the yarn is more connected, it is a little harder to expose and shift things. They move less relative to one another, like the way the minis do. Our yarn mops today are on many different bases, and this kind of yarn mop technique where I am wiping dry dye powder from my gloved fingertips onto yarn is not the best to do a comparison of different yarn bases and how they absorb dye. So even though I have 5 different yarn bases here, they may all look different, but it depends on how much I was rubbing the dye into the yarn, and it also depends on how much I steamed in the middle versus sort of squished it and let the color spread. And so the differences here, again, aren't really because of the yarn base, but all of them are pretty, and I'm thankful that there's enough pastel and white in here, so that way we still have good contrast with our main colorway. And because I have the black light plugged in, you can't really tell from here. It's funny because there's enough ambient light in here that, like, yes, you can see some areas are lit up, but I gotta zoom you in. I feel like the camera was also far enough away Okay, you can see those pinks glowing. But yeah, not as much, just little pops of fluorescent pink. I wouldn't market yarn mops like this as fluorescent, just because there is a lot of other stuff that isn't fluorescent in there. But I think it's always just fun whenever you walk through like a black light at a museum or something, and then you get to see something you're wearing glow. We went to a theme park for my newly 10-year-old's birthday, and I was wearing some neon nail polish, and a couple of the colors were fluorescent, and they glowed under a black light that was part of the ride. Of course, it was a roller coaster, so I couldn't take a picture, but I was very excited. And so that's just why I get excited for moments like this, just moments with yarn, like moments where you see that color glow is just so exciting. And now that these skeins are all twisted, well, at least all the full skeins are twisted, I need to go twist up some minis. Here are a bunch of the twisted minis, and you can see there's a batch that's a little more saturated, a batch that's a little less, some batches that are a little more blended, and some that have a little more contrast. That's part of the randomness of this type of technique. I think even if you were to measure the amount of dye powder you're going to add on in each stage, there would still be differences, because maybe on one batch you do 5 patches of blue, and maybe on another you just do 3. And so that all just sort of can add some variation to it. But nevertheless, the results are beautiful. It's funny, the minis definitely, when twisted, you see more variation there than you see in the full skeins, but don't forget there's more twist in each of those minis, and so that blends the colors up more. And there's less twist in a full skein, not just because the full skeins are a little bit longer, but also each full skein is thicker, so you get fewer twists per inch to have a similarly tight skein. And so that can just account for some of the differences we see. But the colors are still super close. In a few of the videos this year, I have dyed a full 100-gram skein of some of the colorways. And each night when the videos are coming out, those are available in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. I don't know if it's still available or if someone already snagged it, but you can go and check that out. You can find a link to my shop down in the video description. And there may also be some other mystery Chanukah colorways still available that you can also snag. Why is this one of my favorite yarn dyeing techniques? To take dry dye powders and sort of randomly apply them onto the yarn, let it spread out, maybe add speckles, maybe not. I love the organic nature of the way that the colors spread, blend together, and the way that it's very like free-flowing and I can make things up as I go along. I find that I'm not getting stressed about, oh no, did I drop some of the color in the wrong place? There's no wrong place. It's just very freeing to me, and I really, really enjoy that. It's especially fun when I pull a bunch of colors and then decide what I want to use as I'm going. Sometimes if I have a plan and I'm like, okay, I need to use all of these colors, then I might feel forced into something. And so I find like my art is more free and a little more true when I edit things as I go. And all dyers will come up with their favorite techniques. And we all might have some techniques that we really love and others that we really do not care for. And this type of technique is one of my favorites, but also because I really like creating yarn that doesn't pool. Or where the colors are more randomly distributed. I find when I'm knitting with yarn, pooling can sometimes start to stress me out, especially as your tension changes and the way the yarn is pooling might shift. So if there's just shifts to the placement and orientation of the colors throughout the whole yarn, then you get a lot more randomness in your finished colorway. And I love that. With tonight's colorway specifically, I was really excited to have the speckles not be a dark color and to have the yarn still feel like there's a brightness to it. I really, really enjoyed that and need to play around with that more going forward. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and if you're not already subscribed, what on earth are you waiting for? Please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of my videos. I do special events like this Chanukah special a couple times a year, but otherwise I post weekly, and you don't want to miss it because even though I've been posting twice a week for years now, I'm still finding different ways to combine colors and yarn, and I feel like I'm always creating new colorways, and it is so much fun, and I love sharing the whole process with all of you. If you want other ways to help support the content here, there is a little thanks button down at the bottom of the video where you can contribute to me directly, or I have a Patreon where you can get some other behind the scenes content and help shape the direction of the Dye Pot PS series. You'll find tons of links to everywhere you can find me down in the video description. I always try to link to not just where you can find me on social media and my shop, but also the tools and equipment that I use throughout my videos, because I hope to make yarn dyeing feel as accessible and approachable as possible. I cannot wait for you to see what I've dyed for Chanukah Night 6. I will see you tomorrow night. Thank you so much for watching, and happy Chanukah!